Welcome back. We are starting chapter 4 today, and when we left off last, we know that Bud got out of the shed by busting through the window, and now he's thinking about getting even on the Amoses. So we're starting at chapter 4, page 31. Make sure you annotate along with me. Here we go. They hadn't locked the kitchen window. It slid open with just a couple of squeaks. Then I was inside the Amos house, crouched down like a cat burglar. Quick as a rabbit, I looked under the table to see if they moved my suitcase. It was still there. I got a whole lot calmer when I picked it up, and it was about the right weight. I didn't think they'd taken anything out of it. I couldn't be sure until I looked inside, but I could do that later. I took in a deep breath and looked over the icebox to page 32, see if the shotgun was still there. I let all the air out in a big puff when I saw it. Shucks. You'd think that with the Amoses being so doggone mean, they'd worry about leaving a big old gun like that out in the open. What if one of the visitors got real mad at them about something? I unlocked the back door and set my suitcase on the first step of the porch so I could make a quick getaway after I was through paying these Amoses back. I opened the screen door real quiet and went back into the house. Fair is fair. The Amoses deserved what they were going to get. I can't all the way blame Todd for giving me trouble, though. If I had a regular home with a mother and father, I wouldn't be too happy about other kids living in my house either. Being unhappy about it is one thing, but torturing the kids who were there, even though they don't want to be, is another. It was my job to make sure other kids who didn't know where their mothers and fathers were didn't have to put up with Todd. My heart started jumping around in my stomach as soon as I reached out for the shotgun. It was a lot longer and heavier than I thought it would be. I lifted it and felt how solid the smooth brown wood was against my shoulder. With it up close to my face like this, I could smell the gray metal of the barrel and the gun oil that Mr. Amos uses on it. Page 33. I aimed the gun at the stove and pretended I was shooting an elephant or a dragon or a tiger, or, best of all, Todd. I imagined how it would feel to creep up to his bed while he was sleeping and put the shotgun barrel right in his nose. After that, I'd have to do some quick moving to get the grown-up Amoses. Unless they were real sound sleepers, the shotgun going off in Todd's room would give them a clue that something was going on. I lowered the gun. These things were just too dangerous to play with or to take chances with. That's why the first part of my revenge plan was to get this gun out of the way. If something went wrong and the Amoses woke up, I didn't want them rushing down to the kitchen to get the gun. I knew they'd shoot me in a flash and tell the home it was an accident. I took the gun outside and put it on the back porch in a corner where they wouldn't be able to see it until daytime. I felt a lot better when it was out of my hands. When I was back in the kitchen, I started opening up cupboards looking for the drinking glasses. The first one I opened had the jelly jar they'd given me to drink out of at supper time. I walked over to the sink and turned on one of the spigots. These Amoses had hot water running straight into the house. I let it run for a second to warm up and put a dish rag in the bottom of the sink so the splashing wasn't too loud. When the water was good and hot, I stuck the jelly jar underneath it until it was filled to the brim. I started down the hall. Todd's door came open easy as anything. Tiptoed over to his bed. He was deep asleep, and his hands were crossed on his chest like he was ready for the graveyard. I dipped my middle finger in the water. It felt like the perfect temperature. I held my breath and picked up one of Todd's chubby hands. One of the older boys at the home told me, if you dipped someone's hands in a warm glass of water whilst they were sleeping, they don't have any choice but to pee the bed. It's something about chemistry and biology making some valve in your guts open up and whoop, zoop, sloop, you've got a wet bed. I started to dip Todd's fingers in the water. But I couldn't dip more than 2 fingers at a time. Todd's bed strayed dry as the desert. I tried holding Todd's hand flat and pouring the water over it, but he still didn't wet the bed. Finally, I decided to just pour the water on his pajama pants. I pulled the blanket and sheet down and emptied the jar. His face twitched a couple of times, and for a minute, it looked like his eyes were going to come open, but they stayed shut. He smiled, and the warm water from the jelly jar opened that little valve up, and whoop, zoop, sloop, he soaked his sheets. I tiptoed out of the room and down the hall and out the door. My favorite saying in the whole world is, "He who laughs last laughs best." So I put my hand over my mouth and whispered, "Ha, ha, ha." I picked up my suitcase and walked to the street. Man, I was on the lam. I was just like Public Enemy number 1. If J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI saw me now, I'd be in some real serious hot water. Page 36, Chapter 5. Being on the lam was a whole lot of fun, for about 5 minutes. Every time my heart beat, I could feel the blood rush pushing hot and hard on the inside of my sting spots and the bite on my hand. But I couldn't let that slow me down. I had to get out of this neighborhood as quick as I could. I knew a nervous-looking, stung-up kid with blood dripping from a fish head bite and carrying an old raggedy suitcase didn't look like he belonged around here. The only hope I had was the North Side Library. If I got there, maybe Miss Hill would be able to help me. Maybe she'd understand and would be able to tell me what to do. And for now, I could sneak into the library's basement to sleep. It was a lot later than I'd ever been up before, and I was kind of scared of the cops catching me. I had to be real careful, even if it was the middle of the night, even if I was crouching down, sneaking along the street like Pretty Boy Floyd. At the library, I walked past a row of giant Christmas trees that were planted on the side of the building. There was a door on the side with a bright light burning above it, so I kept walking in the shadows made by the big trees. When I got to the back windows, I almost busted out crying. Somebody had gone and put big metal bars on the windows. Even though I knew it was useless, I tried tugging at the bars, but they were the real McCoy, solid steel. I headed back to the Christmas trees. They were low enough to the ground that no one could see me unless they were really looking, so I started opening my suitcase. Most folks don't have sense enough to carry a blanket around with them. But you never know when you might be sleeping under a Christmas tree at the library, so I always keep mine handy. I untied the strange knots that the Amoses had put on my twine and opened the suitcase. I could tell right away that someone had been fumbling through my things. First off, page 38, whenever I put the blanket in, I always fold it so that it stops all the other things from banging up against each other. But those doggone Amoses had just stuffed it in without paying no mind to what it was mashing up against. I lifted the blanket out and saw that everything else was still there. You might be able to say that the Amoses were some mean old nosy folks, but you couldn't call them thieves. I picked up the old tobacco bag that I keep my rocks in. I could tell by the way the drawstring was pulled that the Amoses had been poking through this too. I jiggled it up and down with my hand a couple of times, and it felt like none of the rocks was missing, but I opened it to count them anyway. None of them was gone. Next, I pulled Mama's picture out of the envelope I kept it in and held it so the light from the library side door would shine down on it. It looked like the Amoses hadn't heard it. This was the only picture of Mama in the world. Running across top of it was a sign that was writ in a long, skinny flag. It said, "Boys and girls, follow the gentle light to the misbegotten moon park." Underneath the sign, between the 2 big wagon wheels, was Mama. She was about as old as I am now, and was looking down and frowning. I couldn't understand why she was unhappy. This park looked like a kind of place where you could have a lot of fun. In the picture, Mama was sitting on a real live little midget horse. It looked tired and dragged out like those big workhorses do, but it had a tiny, teeny body with a big sag where most horses have a straight back. Mama was sitting right in the middle of the horse's back, riding him side saddle, except there wasn't any saddle, so I guess you'd have to say she was riding him side sag. She had 2 6-shooter pistols in her hands, and the way her face looked, you could tell she wished she could have emptied them on somebody. And I know who that somebody was. Mama told me it was her father, my granddad. He'd gone and ruined everybody's fun that day by getting in a big fight with my mother about the gigantic white 25-gallon Texas cowboy hat that she was wearing. Mama used to tell me, that hard-headed man insisted, mind you, that I wear that horrible hat. The hat was almost as big as Mama, and you could see it was fake because as tall as it was, no real cowboy could have wore it without getting it knocked off his head every time he rode under a tree or some telegraph wires. Mama told me that some man used to drag the midget horse all through her neighborhood with the camera, and if your mama or daddy signed a piece of paper, he'd take some pictures of you, then come back in a couple of weeks so you could buy them. Mama wasn't looking like she had any rocks in her jar because the hat, page 40, was so fake that a real cowboy would have laughed you out of town for wearing it. She was mad because the hat was so dirty. When she used to tell me about it, her eyes would get big and burny, like the whole thing happened the day before yesterday instead of all those years ago. She'd start moving around our apartment real quick, picking up things and putting them back in the exact same spot. Filth, she'd say about the hat. Absolute filth. Why, the thing was positively alive with germs. Who knows what type of people had worn it? I'd say, I don't know, Mama. She'd say, who knows how many years it had been worn by who knows how many sweaty little heads? I'd say, I don't know, Mama. She'd say, the entire band on the inside was black, and I'm sure it was crawling with ringworm, lice, and tatters. I'd say, yes, Mama. She'd say, and that horrid little photographer didn't care. Did you imagine it ever occurred to him to wash it? I'd say, no, Mama. She'd say, of course not. We meant less to him than the horse he mistreated, so... I'd say, yes, Mama. She'd say, but your grandfather insisted. To this day, I cannot understand why, but he insisted. I'd say, yes, Mama. We had that conversation a lot of times. That's what we're going to stop right now. We've read 10 pages, so we are done. Make sure you annotate, and we'll pick up to see more about Bud's mama tomorrow.